What is up, YouTube? So today we are talking again about the Roland SPD-SX. I made a video a while ago and I talked about one of the main reasons I use the Roland is for an acoustic set. Most of the acoustic sets I do are not actually acoustic because there's microphones involved and all of that. There's a sound system and everything. So it's not necessarily an acoustic set, but it's a low volume set. So they want someone to play cajon or whatever. But for me, I don't like cajon.
I got a bad feeling about this.
I used to play like a small mini drum set. You know, I had a tiny little snare drum, a tiny little kick drum that was low volume. And then I was like, that's kind of a pain. But this Roland is amazing for low volume acoustic sets. So the first thing you'll need when you go to play an acoustic set on this, because you don't want to play cajon and you don't want to bring a mini drum set like me, the first thing you'll need are sounds. And you can get sounds a lot of places. You can go to I Want That Sound. They have free samples. The link is in the description. They have free samples. They're amazing. They're a Nashville-based company and they're great. So their samples are incredible. A lot of what you're going to hear is the I Want That Sound stuff. Most of the samples I have just come from producers who work with the artist I've played for over the years that I've toured. An artist has a song that we're playing live and they want this particular kick drum sound, this particular snap sound, this particular tambourine that was in the recording. So the producer sends it to me. I have it on a hard drive somewhere. A lot of them make it to the Roland, and now it's just the sound that I have that I use when I feel like it's appropriate. So that's another way to get samples. Just look through what, live shows, and if you make backing tracks for people, maybe there's some cool samples out of there. That's another way to do it. And then a word to the wise, just always make sure that before you put the samples on the Roland, you make them as loud as you can, whether that means you go to Logic or even GarageBand probably and gain it up or compress it or whatever. You want those samples to be as loud as you can. Just know that if there's any way you can get them louder before you get them to the Roland, that's good, because you can always turn samples down, but you can't always turn them up if they're just not loud enough. They didn't get exported at the right volume or whatever. So the first thing you need, sounds. The second thing you need when you're playing on the Roland for an acoustic set is to think like a producer. So when you go your acoustic set and you play cajon, you have a lot of dynamic range you can do because you can play it louder or softer, and you also just have a lot of variety you can do by ghost notes and all that stuff. With the Roland, there's not as much freedom there. Ghost notes aren't going to sound that good unless you have a certain pad that, sounds good with ghost notes, because it's one hit and then you're done. So I think you really need to think like a producer. If you listen to pop songs that are on the radio right now, usually the drum grooves are like 2, 4, or even 8 bars long. There's a lot of variety. It's not just boom, ka, boom, ka. Sometimes it is, don't get me wrong. But a lot of times there's a lot of complexity to the kick drum grooves, to all of that stuff. It's not random. It's just that the phrases are 4, 8 bars long because the samples are all the same. So to add interest, to add variety, they mix up the kick drum pattern and the snare drum pattern and all that stuff. So I think it's important to think like a producer. You can't really do this, because that sounds terrible. Those snaps are bleeding over the kick drum, it's too busy. What you could do is so that was a 4-bar loop. The kick drum pattern changed. I left out a snare drum there, and then at the very last beat 4, there was a clap, which was different. And I think thinking like a producer, thinking how can I build each section? The verse has a particular kick pattern. The chorus has another kick pattern. The bridge, drops out and it's only this thing. Thinking how can I shape this whole song is going to be really important, because you don't have quite the ability to control dynamics or ghost notes or anything like that, because the pad kind of locks you into a lot of stuff. So number 3 Along with thinking like a producer, I think it's kind of hand in hand. But number 3 is you need to use sonic variety. And I mean that in 2 ways. So the first is, like I kind of did in that last example, the kick drum and snaps were most of that groove, but then on beat 4 of that last measure, I had a clap. That clap is interesting. That clap adds variety. That clap adds a new level. And it only comes around every couple of measures. That's interesting. That's sonic variety. So, maybe the verse groove is just that. So that's the verse groove. Now in the chorus, I don't want to use those same samples. So I'm going to sonically get some variety by using different samples that are also just a little bit louder. The snaps are pretty thin and they provide a nice backbeat and they have a lot of reverb, but they're not attacky, they're not punch, they're not in your face. When I go to the chorus, I'm going to use a much bigger kick drum, a much bigger kick drum sound, and I'm going to use snare drums that are a lot more aggressive and a lot more like traditional snare drums. So to give you, for instance, I maybe do... So that kick drum is much bigger, and that clap tambourine thing together is cool. And then again, on that beat 4, I have just a tambourine. Instead of the tambourine, maybe I use this other thing. That's actually a sample tambourine and a snare drum, but whatever it is, it sounds way different than... Way different. I think a lot cooler than just, picking a snare and kick sample and then riding it through the whole song. Kick drums never change, whatever. That is boring. We've talked about samples. We've talked about thinking like a producer. We've talked about using sonic variety. And now you can start to use effects as well. So one of the things I really like to do when using this is using the effects. So there's 2 main ways I do this. I, for one, do not love using one of these pads as the main timekeeper of a song. And what I mean by that is I don't usually just sit down and play 8th note hi-hats on the SPD-SX. I think it sounds cheesy. I think it sounds lame. I just don't like doing it, which is a lot of times while I'll have a shaker and that'll be the timekeeper. In other certain circumstances, I'll use the onboard effects to provide me a timekeeper type sound. The thing that I don't like about just making one of these pads a hi-hat and playing it is it just sounds too robotic. It doesn't sound lively. It just, ugh. So I will use the onboard effects to add a dotted 8th note delay or an 8th note delay to one of these samples so that when I hit one pad, it'll go, but it'll trail off. And this does 2 things. One, it adds, as it trails off, it adds dynamic variety and it doesn't sound like a robot's playing it. But also what it does is I don't have to use that one hand to keep playing that hi-hat because maybe the kick and snare pattern is kind of complicated and I only have 2 arms. I don't have that kick drum being able to be played by my foot, so I need my hands when I can. So what I'll do is I'll set up one of the pads so where it has an effect on it. That is coming from a dotted 8th delay that is on the Roland. If you go into Kit and you go into Kit Effects, right now my second effect is a sync delay and it is 100% tap time and it's all this stuff. So that's what it sounds like. But when I go to Kit and then I go to Output and then I go to Master but hit the plus arrow twice, you can see that it's still going to the master, but it's going through the FX2 before it gets there. So FX2 is that delay, and now you're hearing that. So that's only on that pad. You can see none of the other pads have that delay except for this pad and this pad. So now I have this effect on here that really gives me a lot of cool variety. I can do the verse groove. Let's say that's the verse groove, and then maybe the pre-chorus, I can add that little hi-hat. So that is how you use effects through the kit effects, but there's also a section here that I also use called the master effects. And that is something you can toggle with the effect switch on the front of the Roland. So I have mine set to a reverb. So you can hear this kick drum here, kind of dry, kind of short. If I hit this effect switch, it's much bigger, much roomier, much verbier. I add, these effects to maybe go from the verse, which is instead of needing to load a new kick drum and a new snare sample that has more verb for the chorus or whatever, I can just hit this switch and immediately go from a smaller verse sound to a big chorus sound. So there you go. That's the other way you can use the effects, is for verb. There's a ton of effects in here too. There are filters, there are a bunch of things. So this is just like the starting point, but those are the couple things I think you need to keep in mind if you're gonna play this on an acoustic set. 1, you need good sounds. 2, you need to think like a producer, make drum parts that grow with the song, that are repeatable, that are a couple bars long so that they're interesting. 3, you need sonic variety, which are different sounds for the verses and choruses, and then the bridge has its own sounds and all that stuff. And then 4, utilize the effects to make your timekeeping interesting and to, add more dynamic variety by having, reverb in the choruses but not in the verses and all that stuff. So those are just a couple ways I utilize this for an acoustic set. Try it out. It's worth it, I promise, because you'll get into it. I'm sure that, this is something I don't really do that much, so I haven't even gone that far into what all you can do with this thing, but it's so nice for me to show up to an acoustic set and say, hey, here are these 2 lines, I'm set up. I don't have to bring any kind of little kits or anything like that. I don't even necessarily need mics if I'm not playing shaker, so I can just show up with this thing and it's done. It's good, it's ready, it's good to go, and that is awesome. Those are the ways I use this thing for an acoustic setup. What do you think? Put in the comments, would you use this for an acoustic gig? Have you tried it? Do you want to try it now that you've seen this? Do you have any questions? And then also subscribe, hit that notification bell. I have new lessons every week, and yeah, that's it for now, and I'll see you in the next one.